Session 7, Releasing Your Brakes.
When I began studying negative emotions many years ago, the most critical point I discovered was that you cannot make any progress toward health, happiness, love, and fulfillment of your potential as long as you insist on keeping your negative emotions intact. Now, the only good thing about negative emotions, if there is any good thing at all, is that negative emotions are not permanent. Even according to Sigmund Freud, there is no permanent place for negative emotions in the subconscious. In other words, they are unwanted visitors. They are negative habits or negative response patterns that can be eliminated. And the starting point of eliminating them is understanding where they came from. Understanding what were the causative factors going back to early childhood that have triggered the development of negative emotions and have given us as adults a propensity to be negative in one way or another. That takes us to early childhood conditioning. Remember we said before that the starting point of inhibitive and compulsive negative habit patterns was destructive criticism. Destructive criticism is the great destroyer. Destructive criticism destroys people on the inside and leaves them walking around on the outside. More personalities have been undermined and destroyed. More self-esteem has been cast aside as a result of destructive criticism than anything else that we can possibly imagine. So destructive criticism is the great killer. Now, why is it so bad? Well, we know that children as infants, children as they're growing up, have a tremendous need for love and approval from their parents. In fact, many psychiatrists and psychologists have said that the number one reason for mental illness in adulthood is withdrawal of love or love withheld. We know that any prestigious person, any person who is important to a child, has an inordinate impact on that child, and that children up to the age of 6 years have very little ability to discriminate between valid and invalid criticism. What this means is that anything that a parent or an older sibling or an older relative, anything that a prestigious person or important person says to a child is accepted as true. It's accepted as a valid representation of reality. If a mother says you're a bad boy, if daddy says you're lazy, if someone says that you're not dependable, if someone says you're stupid or you're clumsy or you're ugly, the child has no capacity whatever to discriminate between valid and invalid. The child accepts that as a true representation of reality. It bypasses the conscious mind, goes straight into the subconscious, and is stored. Many of us, as adults, are still living on the basis of negative information that was programmed into us when we were children. And then as adults, what do we say? We say, well, that's just the way I am. Or, I've always been that way. Or some people even say, well, it runs in the family. Your father was like that, children are like that. Or your mother was like that, and so on. But where did it come from? None of these things run in the family. For instance, when I was growing up, my parents had gone through the Depression. And the Depression had made an inordinate impact on them. So whenever we talked about buying anything, all the time I was growing up, my parents would become very, very tense, and they said, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. They had this lack mentality, this we can't afford it mentality all their lives. And I grew up, so even though I've never experienced the Depression, and you've never experienced the Depression in most cases, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, we're still saying, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. I can't afford it. We're still going on the basis of those critical remarks, those emotionalized remarks that our parents said. Maybe your parents said, as my father told me over and over again, you never finish anything you start. You never finish anything you start. You never finish anything you start. Or you're lazy. You never finish anything you start. Do you know, when I was an adult, I had a terrible time finishing things that I started. As I would get close to the end of a task, I would actually begin to seize up and look for every single excuse to procrastinate and delay. Now, the second factor that predisposes us to negative emotions is lack of love. We know that children's personalities develop to the degree to which they receive a high quality and a high quantity of love from their parents. There's a one-to-one relationship between the amount of love, the quality and quantity of love, and healthy personality. That love withdrawn or deprivation of love is the key cause of unhappiness, negativity, and mental illness in adulthood. Now, in order for a child to feel truly loved, the child must have high self-concept parents, and most of us, unfortunately, had parents that were the victims of their parents and the victims of their parents. What one of the writers says, everybody is a victim of a victim. We are all victims of victims. In other words, parents meant to raise us the best way they could, but they were victims of victims themselves. Now, in order for a child to feel fully loved, three conditions have to exist. Number one condition is that parents must love themselves. Parents must love themselves. Remember, you can never give any more love to others than you have for yourself. If you don't love yourself, you can't love your children. If you have a little bit of love for yourself, you have to spread it over your children. If you have a little bit of love for yourself and that's all taken up by your husband or your wife, then sometimes, even though you want to love your children, you don't have the love. Even if your parents wanted to love you, in many cases they didn't have the love to give. Why? It's because they never got it when they were growing up. The second requirement is that parents must love each other. In order for a child to grow up feeling self-confident, to grow up feeling loved, to grow up feeling safe and secure, he or she must grow up in an environment where the parents love each other. There is nothing that is more frightening to a child than to grow up in a household where the parents are fighting with each other, where the parents don't love each other, where there's difficulty, because the child always has a tendency, first of all, to be a victim, in that the child is shouted at and screamed at, and the child, it's pretty logical. The fact of the matter is, though, and this is the hardest thing for you or I as adults even to think about, but it is possible that our parents didn't love us. Not that they didn't intend to. I mean, they meant to love us, and they wanted to love us, and they had us intending to love us and so on, but simply because they had conflicts with each other, and they had unresolved problems with their parents, and they had the war and the depression, and they had their careers, and they had other responsibilities, they just never got around to it. You see, that was the difficulty. They meant to, but they never got around to it. The only way that you can really love a child is by spending a high quantity and high quality of time with the child. High quantity, high quality with the child. 10 minutes a day doesn't do it. Children consider themselves valuable to the degree to which the most important people in their lives spend time with them. If the most important people in their lives, their parents, only spend a little time with them, the children conclude that the reason for that is because they are defective. There is something essentially wrong with them, and that's why their parents don't spend time with them. The children don't think rationally, they think purely emotionally. They only think if the parent is here, he loves me or she loves me. If the parent doesn't spend time with me, he or she doesn't love me. So if any one of those three conditions or more existed when you were growing up, the parents didn't love themselves, the parents didn't love each other, or maybe the parents didn't love you because they never got around to it, although they meant to, then you will have grown up in conjunction with destructive criticism with what is called guilt. Now, what is guilt? Well, guilt is a feeling of not being worth very much. Where do we get this feeling? Well, when we're continually criticized by the important people in our lives, and simultaneously we are not given the amount of love that we need, we feel that we're not worth very much. We feel that we are worth less. And a feeling of guilt leads to a feeling of worthlessness. Worthlessness. And guilt, the feeling of worthlessness, is the underlying fundamental problem of the 20th century. It is the main source of mental illness. It is the main source of problems in relationships. It's the main source of psychosomatic illness. It is the main source of most of the problems that beset our society, is this deep down feeling of guilt and worthlessness, which is expressed or unexpressed in the thought or the attitude, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. You know, we talked about self-esteem and how important it was. Self-esteem means I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. People who've been raised with destructive criticism and lack of life not only don't like themselves, they don't feel that they're good enough for anybody or anything, and in many cases they are plagued by self-hatred. They hate themselves. Self-hatred or self-condemnation. And you will see this will come out in their conversation, and it will come out in their relationships with other people. People who hate themselves, even though they want to have good relationships with other people, are simply not capable of it. People who don't feel that they're good enough for anything will always bring it to the surface. It will always be a problem. Now, what is the main way? You can get their money, you can get their time, you can get their commitment, you can demand their resources, and so on. And many organizations use punishment, use guilt as a tool for doing this. Many of the charities that advertise on television, especially charities for very needy causes involving children or disabled people, use the feeling of guilt. You're doing so well, you should feel guilty for these people who are suffering. Therefore, send us some money, and that will take care of your guilt for a little while, until we get you on our mailing list, and so on. So guilt is a standard. Why is it that guilt is so commonly used? Well, first of all, because almost all of us have it to a greater or lesser degree. And number two, it's easy. Guilt is the easiest. Why do our parents use guilt on us? Why do our mothers use guilt on us? Because a mother can control us with guilt across a crowded room. She can control us over 1,000 miles of telephone line. Parents can use guilt on their children because their parents use guilt on them, when their parents use guilt on them, because it's the easiest. There's no physical effort. You can do it with a look, a glance, and a word. And people always do the easiest thing, as you know. So be alert to it. Now, if you've been brought up in an environment where you've been made to feel guilty, and almost all of us have, you must understand that guilt is like a cesspool of negative emotional bacteria that sits at the core or the root of your psyche or your subconscious, and it springs forth all other negative emotions: anger, hatred, envy, resentment, frustration, and doubt and fear, and so on and so forth. It controls, it creates them all. And the way to really, really get rid of that core is to excise it and cut it out completely. So that's what we're going to do in the rest of this session. First of all, how can you tell if you've been brought up with feelings of guilt? All right, we'll call this the adult manifestations of guilt. Adult manifestations of guilt. You can tell, and you can just test yourself, how many of these do you have? Number one, adult manifestation of guilt, is you have feelings of inferiority. Feelings of inferiority, feelings of inadequacy, and feelings of undeservingness. In other words, you don't feel that you deserve good things to happen to you. If a person has been brought up with destructive criticism, made to feel guilty, then when they do succeed, even with tremendous effort later on in life, they have a terrible tendency to feel that they don't deserve it. This is called, by the way, fear of success. Fear of success is just another way of saying that a person who has been conditioned to believe themselves to be unworthy or not good enough feels very, very uncomfortable when they experience success. They feel very, very tense and uneasy. As a matter of fact, if they feel too much tension, they'll start snorting coke, drinking too much alcohol. They'll engage in self-destructive behaviors. They'll have a tremendous, overwhelming feeling of anxiety, like somebody's going to find them out. There's a book on the bookstand that says, if I'm doing so well, how come I feel like an imposter? They have what is called the imposter syndrome. Have you ever been successful at something and people come up to you and say, boy, you did a great job at that, or that's wonderful, even if you had worked hard at it, and you felt like they were going to find you out? You felt like, they would find out that you weren't really that good, that it was just a fluke, it was just an accident. And of course, that's what people say. They say it was just a fluke. It was just an accident. I don't know how it happened. I'll blow it next time. They do everything possible to get away from this feeling of inferiority and undeservingness. So be alert to that. Now, the second adult manifestation of guilt is destructive self-criticism. There is a line from one of the poets that says, those to whom evil is done do evil in return. Children at a very early age, sometimes at the age of 2 or 3, begin to run themselves down, tear themselves down, even to hit themselves and physically punish themselves if they're criticized enough. They're always saying the equivalent of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not very good. And they punish themselves. So destructive self-criticism is a real symptom of an underlying feeling of guilt and inadequacy. Number 3 is easily manipulated by guilt. People can pull your guilt strings. Very simple. As a matter of fact, we find that there are 2 types of people in the world. There's guilt throwers and there's guilt catchers. And these people are invariably attracted to each other. And of course, the guilt thrower is the person who identified with a parent who threw the guilt. The guilt catcher is the person who identified with a parent who caught the guilt. But the guilt throwers and the guilt catchers then get together. They balance nicely. They settle down. They raise new generations of little guilt throwers and guilt catchers. But you can tell that you're easily manipulated by guilt. Because you've been conditioned to be responded to. Your boss can pull your guilt string. A person on a bus can pull your guilt string. The airline flight attendant can pull your guilt string. Be very, very alert to this. The third manifestation, or the fourth manifestation of guilt, is that you use it. You use guilt and blame generously. Why? Well, it's been worked on you, you work it on them. I mean, if exchange is a fair deal. You use guilt and blame generously. It becomes the basis of your... You fertilize it. Victim language is language like, I can't. I can't. I can't. Whenever you say I can't, I can't. I can't. You're sending a message to the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind picks up that you are helpless, that you're not in control, that you're a victim. And so when you actually come to want to do something, the subconscious mind just feeds back your own command and says, you can't. You can't. The second thing is you say, I have to. I have to. Again, I have no control. I'm not in charge. But here's two other expressions of victim language that you've got to be careful of. And it's this one. I'll try. I'll try. Whatever it is, I'll try. What does the words I'll try mean? Well, let me tell you what they mean. They mean I'm going to fail, and I'm telling you in advance so that you can't come back on me. In other words, you say, well, I'll try to be there on time, but what you're saying is I'll probably be late, and there's no point. You can't come back on me because I said I'd try. Whenever a person says, I'll try, they are excusing failure in advance. If you went to the doctor and the doctor did an examination and checked you all over and looked at you and came back and said, well, geez, you're in terrible condition. We're going to have to do triple bypass surgery and get you over to the hospital right now. I'm surprised you even made it in. And you say, well, geez, doctor, I sure hope you'll do a good job. And he says, I'll try. And he says, I'll try. He said, wait a second. Maybe I got to get a second opinion. You go to a lawyer. You're charged with something. You go to a lawyer and you present your case to the lawyer and say, look, will you defend me? He says, I'll try. What is he saying? He's saying, look, I've looked at the case, and from what I see, there's not much hope, but I'll take it on anyway. I'll try. And they're the ones that try to get you to pay in advance, too. Another set of words that you mustn't use. By the way, with regard to I'll try, what you do is you say, I'll do it or I won't do it. Not I'll try. If ever, in our business, we run a very, very active business. Whenever we call somebody up and we ask them, can we get this or that? And they say, well, I'll try to have it to you by Friday, or I'll try to get it done on time. We instantly know that they're telling us that they want off the hook, they're not going to do it. And so we never let anybody get away with I'll try. We say it has to be done or not, and we want a guarantee. And if necessary, we'll go and pick it up. But whenever they say I'll try, what they're doing is they're sloughing you off. So be alert to that. And the other words are I wish. A wish, as they say, is a desire or a goal with no energy behind it. I wish. What does I wish mean? I wish means that I would like to have something, but I know I never can. When you say, I wish I could lose weight, what does it mean? The unspoken words are, but I know I can't. Why can't you? Because of the excuses that you have and the metabolism that you have and the problems and so on. There's always reasons because you have to go out and so on. I wish I could quit smoking. I wish I could get fit. I wish, I wish, I wish. Whenever you use the words I wish, you signal to the subconscious that this is something that you do not believe it's possible for you to achieve or acquire. The subconscious then completely discards it as a goal and gives you no energy, no motivation, no drive, no desire to accomplish it. So be very, very alert to victim language. Be alert to the expression, yes, but. Oh, I do it, yes, but. Oh, and to let go past grievances is the single most important determinant of whether or not you are a fully integrated, fully functioning adult human being. Because the tendency to blame and to hold grudges is a childlike, pathological tendency that is possessed by all people who are mentally ill. The ability to let go of grudges, to forgive freely, is the mark of the truly enlightened human being. Now, if you accept that as true, there's 4 people that you have to forgive. Number 1 is forgive your parents. Forgive your parents for everything that they've ever done that hurt you. Most of our research shows that almost all of our adult problems trace back to being unwilling or unable to forgive our parents for something that they did that hurt us. Forgive them 100%. Write to them, telephone them, tell them, or at the very least, forgive them in your heart, but forgive your parents. Number 2 is forgive others. Forgive everyone else. Forgive everyone who has ever hurt you in any way for anything. Just let it go. Now, some people say, well, I can't forgive that person because what a terrible thing they did. Guilt. The key to being a totally, fully functioning person is to forgive others. Forgive people that you've been in relationships with. Forgive previous employers. Forgive friends who've hurt you. Forgive investments that went wrong. Forgive bosses that fired you. Forgive your parents. Forgive everybody. Develop an attitude toward life that you refuse to hold a grudge against anybody. Just repeat over and over again, I forgive him or her for everything. I forgive him or her for everything. I forgive them for everything. And let it go. The key to freeing yourself from negative emotions is to absolutely refuse to carry any negativity forward. Remember, it's a perfectly selfish act. You can be as selfish as you want. The act of forgiveness frees you and liberates the other person and guarantees that you will move rapidly toward the fulfillment of your potential.